My name is Kristen Clifford. I'm honored to be joining as the new president and CEO of UMDF. I come to this role with deep personal and professional commitment to patient-centered work, and I look forward to learning from all of you, learning from your lived experiences, and working with you in the months and years ahead. I truly believe that the voices of affected individuals and families have to remain at the center of everything we do, and that includes not just research and advocacy, but also access to high-quality care, to treatment and support across the entire journey. We gather this week with a sense of hope and urgency. Thanks to years of research, advocacy, and collaboration, we're standing at the threshold of hope, the threshold of new possibilities, where potential treatments are moving from clinical trials towards regulatory approval. But approval is only one step in a much longer journey, and that's where we'll begin our conversation this afternoon. As science advances and we get closer to potential therapy approvals, we also must begin thinking seriously about what comes next, how to ensure that treatments are not just developed, but actually reach people that need them the most. Our opening session, Accelerating Access, the Complex Landscape of Drug Launches, will start to begin that conversation for our community. We're bringing together a diverse group of individuals to share their perspectives as we seek to understand some of the challenges and opportunities that we'll face and think about how we can navigate that as a community together. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to be starting this journey with you. I look forward to meeting you all and really looking forward to an amazing week. So let me just start by introducing our panelists and then we'll begin the conversation. To my right, I have Jenny Hobbs with us. Jenny is a UMDF support ambassador, co-founder of the group Advocates for Medically Fragile Kids North Carolina, and mom to 4 kids, Melanie, Michael, Meredith, and Madison, 3 of whom are affected by mitochondrial disease. She's considered one of the leading voices when it comes to Medicaid and waivers and frequently serves as a resource and a presenter in the mitochondrial disease community. Next to Jenny, we have Dr. Bruce Cohen, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Dr. Cohen is a graduate of Washington University right here in St. Louis, shout out to WashU, and one of the leading names in mitochondrial medicine in the world. Dr. Cohen has participated in the education of dozens of neurology residents and fellows, led over a dozen international symposia, organized and conducted investigator-initiated clinical trials, and authored 130 peer-reviewed manuscripts. He has held various roles at UMDF over the years as a volunteer, also with the American Academy of Neurology, Child Neurology Society, Mitochondrial Medicine Society, and American Neurological Association. Dr. Cohen currently serves as the director of Neurodevelopmental Science Center at Akron Children's Hospital. And then to our right, all the way at the end of the panel, also joining us are Gina Zozaya and her daughter Amber O'Neill. Amber is a 33-year-old living with PDCD, for which she has been a clinical trial participant for a number of years. Gina also had a second daughter, Ashley, Amber's twin, who sadly was lost to PDCD in 2019. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. So to start us off, I'd like to ask you each a question just to open us up. When you think about access, it can mean a lot of different things: availability, accessibility, speed, cost. From your perspective, when you think about access, what does that mean to you?
I get to go first? Oh, good. That's easy then. For me, access is actually having it in my hand at my house to give to my kids. So it's not just this, pie in the sky. We just got approval, but I want it to be able for my kids to have this treatment now. So that's what that means to me.
So for me, the hardest part is navigating the gap between FDA approval and actually getting the medication at home ready to give to the person needing to receive it. This gap can be several months long or longer. When FDA approves it, the company actually starts the manufacturing process and the labeling process and educating the doctors who will prescribe the medication about the medication. It doesn't go to the Walgreens pharmacy. These drugs that we're talking about are going to be high priced and will probably be distributed through one or a few pharmacies in the United States. The physician needs to write a prescription for the medication, and then the insurance company has to approve it. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's the educated and the uneducated. Insurance companies aren't going to be educated about these medications for mitochondrial disease until they're FDA approved. They've got the insurance companies have a lot of approval processes that they're dealing with at once. And it's very likely that when these drugs get approved and I write my first prescription, that prescription is going to be denied because the insurance company just doesn't even know about it yet. or if they know about it, they kicking the can down the road. So it's my job as the prescriber to educate the insurance company. The advocacy process is going to be the most interesting for mitochondrial disease as we get into this new era. And the UMDF is going to have to serve as a sort of essential source of truth to educate physicians as well as educate insurance companies.
Thanks, Dr. Cohen. Gina?
So me as a parent, my whole access is being able to have a good doctors, being able to access the drug, and of course, the cost, making sure that my insurance companies will cover it.
Could you share with us a little bit about your journey
So
and some of the barriers that you did experience?
yeah, so my journey actually started giving birth to 34-week-old twins, not knowing and living in a city of Las Vegas where this is in the 90s, didn't know anything about it. So my girls were born early, never detected the disease for many, many months. I went off 6 months and knowing that there were respiratory problems, eating problems, just motor skill problems, and I could never find a doctor to help. Not till they were 12 months old, I had to go outside. I found an outreach program with doctors that were coming into Vegas by a doctor named Dr. Powell, who diagnosed my girls at that point with, by doing a skin biopsy, that they had an enzyme disorder. And he diagnosed at that point PDH, which at that time I had no clue what was happening. I had to go outside. I had to fly to Oregon I met with Dr. Buse, was another person that knew of the disease, which at that point in 1994, he introduced me to Dr. Stackpole at Shands Hospital and told me of some kind of hope that we may have a research program going on with a PDH. So I actually started my journey to say in September of 1994 with my twins, which were Amber and Ashley. The other thing is I had identical twins that were completely different. One was more severe and had a larger impact, and the other one didn't. So we had Ashley that couldn't walk, talk, but she was mobile. She could crawl, and I could understand her. And then we had Amber, who had a little bit more being able to walk, being able to talk. So I was dealing with two different types of children. Well, through the process of going to Shands Hospital for many, many years, I got to be part of the DCA trial. And through that, I gained great doctors like Dr. Stackpole, Dr. Nyberg, Dr. Carney, Dr. Miller, and also wonderful nurses that became part of my life and part of my family. And through the journey is being a single parent and being in Las Vegas, not having anybody to help or resource. I traveled for almost 30 years, which we still do because Amber is still on the drug. But the challenges that I had is the drug was fine for the first couple of years where it was a placebo drug. So it was part of the trial, it was part of everything. But as I went into open label, I had to pay for the drug. And it could get very, very expensive, especially me. I actually had a total of 4 children and I was a single parent. So the struggles were, I have to pay for this drug or do I feed my kids sometimes? It was very hard and challenging. So through it all, at least I did get through it. I had wonderful doctors that I had to have resource of my Florida hospital doctors because my Las Vegas doctors didn't understand the disease, couldn't help me. And I'd always have to reach out to Dr. Stackpole or someone and say, can you please talk to this doctor? And that's a challenge throughout my whole life with these girls. Unfortunately, we did lose Ashley because she did have more problems, and we still have Amber here.
Thank you for sharing that journey, Gina. I did want to let the audience know we do have 2 people in the back of the room with microphones, so anytime throughout our session, our time will go by quickly. If you have questions, please raise your hand and someone with a microphone will find you. We'd love to hear what is on your mind. Jenny, can you talk a little bit for us around some of the coverage decisions that go into rare disease therapies? What do payers evaluate once a treatment's FDA approved, and how does that differ between Medicaid and private systems?
Yeah, so once a drug is approved, then physicians might start writing for this, but an insurance company doesn't get, or at least wouldn't pay attention to all the drugs that are approved and what they're for. So it does take a lot on the physician's part to help explain, as well as the drug company, to explain to the bigger providers. So you've got, your United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, like all of those. But then what's interesting is every state's Medicaid program is completely different. So when you're looking at Medicaid, you're potentially looking at, 50, I actually think it's 56 different departments of social services across the United States. So that's a lot bigger number than your traditional insurances. Children, I feel, are going to have an easier time getting approval if the drug is approved for a child, because there are federal laws in place about requiring Medicaid programs to pay for anything that is deemed to, the program's EPSDT, so it's early prevention, screening, diagnostics, and treatment. So that T is going to cover new drugs, rare disease drugs, that kind of thing. So it may not ever show up on, their preferred drug list, but I can tell you many examples that I'm aware of in North Carolina, where I am, of petitioning that Medicaid program and getting coverage. Unfortunately, EPSDT only covers children up until their 21st birthday. So that's why I feel like, at least with Medicaid, adults are probably going to have a harder time getting coverage just because it's not required. But it doesn't mean they won't. I just think it may take even longer for that population to be able to access the drug.
Dr. Cohen, you highlighted a few different areas that are barriers after drug approval: clinician education, dissemination, working through health systems. When you're thinking about the journey after approval, what do you think is the hardest piece from your perspective to get a therapy into a patient's hands?
So I think the hardest piece is going to get the insurance companies to approve the medication for that particular patient. We're talking about rare diseases, we're talking about expensive drugs, and we're talking about getting on the phone with a nurse or physician that's never heard of mitochondrial disease, much less pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency, or TK2 deficiency, or MELAS, or mitochondrial myopathy. So what I've been down this road a few times, and what I envision will be the discussion is that when I get on that phone with the nurse or physician, I have to become their best friend and say, I need to educate you about this disease and about the research, and let me send you some articles, and so you can read about it, and I'm happy to go through them. I envision the first phone call maybe be 10 minutes long, the next phone call could be a half an hour long. And it's going to take some time. I mean, I think there's something like, we talked about 56 Medicaids, but there's hundreds of major, insurance companies. Blue Cross Blue Shield is not one company, it's dozens of different companies. United Healthcare is one big umbrella organization, but they have hundreds of different policies. So it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And again, the central source of truth for advocacy is going to need to be with the UMDF. So we're putting that burden on the UMDF, and I'm sure you're happy to take it.
Yeah, we are. I think, we all want to continue to prioritize and work to drive research innovation. We want therapies and cures for every mitochondrial disease, and that's why we're all here. But ultimately, part of this work is also ensuring access to high-quality care, and that includes being able to get an early and accurate diagnosis, not to have to wait 6, 7, 8 years for diagnosis that's accurate, to be able to access the care and treatment that everyone deserves once we have those approved treatments. And so there's definitely a lot of work that goes along with that, as Dr. Cohen shared, that includes a lot of education and ensuring that the workforce has the resources that they need to do this work, because it is a heavy lift administratively. So I appreciate you calling that out.
Thank you.
We're so pleased to have Amber with us. So Amber, would you want to take a moment and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Amber. that's my family, that's my sister in prom, that's Dr. Stopful, and this is Ashley, that's Bowman Harriet, and this one I was at bowling, this is my brother, that's Brock.
Tell them about your press conference.
I would see him at the Rams game.
Thank you, Amber. It takes a lot of courage to talk in front of a big group of people like this, and we're so glad you're with us. Jenny, turning back to you and thinking a little bit more about the payer perspective, what types of patient support programs like copay assistance or value-based contracts have you seen that make a real difference when reviewing access models and helping to support patients?
Yeah, not only professionally, but personally, we've been involved in a couple of different patient education programs within pharmaceutical companies. And not only are they great for education, the families especially, but also being able to provide that ongoing support, whether it's, copay assistance, sometimes that's at 100%, or up to a certain dollar amount. And then, and that gets renewed year over year. So it really helps make the price of the drug affordable for families.
Super, super important. Gina, beyond the wait for a therapy, how does uncertainty around insurance, provider knowledge, living in a medical desert where you might not have access to a specialist that understands mitochondrial disease, how does that affect daily life, long-term planning? I know you talked a little bit about those barriers. If you could share a little bit more with us.
Well, like I said, living in Las Vegas, doctors aren't as familiar with it, and not being able to have access to the drug endangers Amber at this time. There's been times, and my biggest fear is not being able to have this drug. There was a time period when Amber, we couldn't have the drug was not available, and within weeks, Amber's body started decreasing and going bad, and it's something I would never want to experience. I feel like full access to the drug and not to worry about the cost is very important. There's a big barrier with people in a city where they're not familiar with it, doctors not understanding it. I know my biggest help was having my doctor talking to my pediatrician, making her understand that it's okay if she calls my Florida doctors, and being able to get a doctor to actually cooperate is sometimes a challenge, and that's always been some of my barriers.
Yeah, that coordination of care is absolutely critical. Dr. Cohen, you talked a little bit about some of the barriers. Where do you see the biggest disconnects between providers, health systems, payers? I know you talked about UMDF and advocates in this room playing a role. Where do you see some of those biggest disconnects where we can have an impact?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is a way of connecting the dots. We have plenty of companies displaying at the UMDF that are going to be putting their drugs through FDA process. So that, that's one barrier that's been broken down. We've got physicians and their patients at the meeting, and that's another barrier. I think the companies are making a concerted effort to think about how they're going to market their product to patients and physicians, and I think that's a good thing. The insurance companies aren't going to want to deal with any particular drug until it's FDA approved, and I think that's the unknown right now.
A follow-up question to that: if a treatment is conditionally approved or it's based on early phase data, how would you as a clinician decide whether or not to recommend it to a patient, and what would that path look like?
So when the FDA conditionally approves the drug, they approve it under the conditions of X, Y, and Z, which really would vary a bit between drug and drug. So in June of 2001, the FDA conditionally approved aducanumab as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, a very expensive medication, high risk, and the data showing that it worked, efficacy was minimal. That conditional approval probably backfired for the Biogen, the company developing and selling the drug because major medical centers said, we're not going to give this drug to any of our patients. And, since then, there have been other drugs that have come along that work better than aducanumab, but aducanumab is still on the market, but not being sold. So if when the drug is conditionally approved or approved, it requires a sit-down conversation, risk-benefit conversation with the patient and their family as to whether it makes sense to use the medication, whether there are alternatives. And, then it really requires a shared decision-making process between the clinician and their patient.
And Jenny, some payer organizations will incorporate external input, but if not, and somebody out there has the ability to access a treatment and receives a denial, do you have any advice for how to advocate, how to share information, real-world data, advocate for yourself, what that could look like to try to fight if you do not receive an approval from Medicaid or a private payer?
Well, definitely, I would say appeal, first of all, because the percentage of denials that are appealed is actually really low. Just because, especially if the ball's in the patient's court, because it can be burdensome, time-consuming, emotionally exhausting to be denied over and over again. I would say comparing, natural history studies to the drug, if that wasn't already included in the preliminary reports, taking, a printout of information to your doctor if they aren't familiar with the drug, and then asking them to maybe contact someone at the Mitochondrial Medicine Society, for example, for guidance on how to prescribe, especially for someone like Gina who has so far to go, because Medicaid programs don't like to approve prescriptions for out-of-state physicians. So even if you have a doctor in Florida or in Pennsylvania, but you live in North Carolina, then that could be a barrier as well. So there are often hurdles that can be overcome, but it takes time and effort.
Thank you. I'm not seeing questions from the audience, so I do want to ask one final question. Our time flew by. This is a time of hope, and so we don't want to diminish the fact that so much hard work has gone on and happened because of the hard work of people in this room, because of our research community, our clinical community, our families and patients who've been a part of trials to get us to the point where we're feeling this hope and seeing potential treatments come to market. So what gives you the most hope right now? I'm going to start with you, Gina. What's the one thing that you believe still needs to change to make access real, and what brings you hope?
Well, my biggest hope is that the DCA is finally approved. I feel like that's always been my obstacles, and the charge of it. Once, maybe if it does get approved, I'm still fearful of my insurance not covering or them not understanding it, because we don't have a lot of patients in Las Vegas with the disease. I know a lot of patients go out of town. So that's my biggest concern, but I do have hope seeing that Amber's still alive. She's 33 years old and the drug is doing what it's supposed to be. So my biggest deal is it finally being approved.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen?
My hope is that I see the fact that companies that make these medications and work for their approval, went from zero when this organization started. And now we have several, and many of these drugs are on the decision list of the FDA. So they're in front of the FDA. The FDA said, we'll give you an answer by August or September or December. So it looks like we're almost there, at least for the first drugs.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Dr. Cohen. We were actually talking before this session. My very first symposium was in 2010, and we'd come in here, and there were no drug companies here. There were no drugs on, in the horizon, nothing. And so just in 14 years to see like how far we've come, that even though today maybe like, oh, well, now we've just said all these other things that might have to happen before my child can get the medicine. And really do feel like we're sprinting at the end and we can see the finish line. And that's it's really hopeful and exciting.
Great. I totally agree. Hopefully next year when we gather together, we're celebrating the fact that we do have disease-modifying therapies for primary mitochondrial disease that are on the market. This is just the beginning of these types of conversations. We know that there are a lot of systemic barriers within the U.S. healthcare system, but we want to make sure, regardless of someone's zip code, that they have access to knowledgeable physicians, and once treatments are available that are applicable, that they can access them. So we'll continue to do the work. We appreciate initiating this conversation. I'd like to thank the panelists. Please join me in thanking them. And I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Phil Yeske for our next group.
Hello, Mito friends. Great to be with you. As Kristen said, I'm Phil Yeske, the Science and Alliance Officer at UMDF. With that title, as you can guess, where I spend most of my time is next door on the SciMed program. That's my profession, that's my job. But my passion is to be here with you, the families. So it's really exciting to be here today to talk about clinical trial readiness. We're going to take a little bit of a step back from the previous panel, which was really addressing an era where we have approved drugs. We hope that's very soon. But ultimately, we're going to need a lot of therapies for mitochondrial disease. It's a complex set of diseases. And the best way to get to all of the therapies that we need for the many different forms of mitochondrial disease for all of our patients is through clinical trial readiness. So how do we prepare as a community to be more ready for clinical trials? So I'm joined today by a few panelists. I'm going to do a quick introduction of them, and then we'll have some opening comments. Immediately to my right is Dr. Amel Karaa. She is the director of the Mito Clinic and Lysosomal Disease Program at Mass General Hospital in Boston. Also outgoing chair of our Scientific and Medical Advisory Board. Thank you, Amel, for all your service there. Next to Amel is Chad Glasser, Senior Director of Clinical Research at Decento Therapeutics, so one of the companies working in the space to try and bring an investigational therapy to market for mitochondrial disease. And at far right, importantly, the patient perspective, Megan Leahey. Megan is a mitochondrial disease patient. She has participated in a clinical trial in mitochondrial disease. I think we'll hear a little bit more of that as we go along. And Megan very kindly agreed to share her perspective on clinical trial readiness. When we were putting this together and thinking about this afternoon's program, we really wanted to try to design a session that's all about bringing effective therapies to patients with thoughtful, inclusive clinical trial design. So hopefully, by the end of this 30 minutes, if I stop talking, we'll be able to create trials that are more efficient, equitable, and feasible for mitochondrial disease patients. So that's kind of the background of what we're looking to accomplish. We're going to start with Dr. Karaa just giving a brief overview of sort of where are we at with clinical trial design for mitochondrial disease, and then we can begin the panel discussion. Dr. Karaa.
Thank you, Phil, and good afternoon, everyone. I thought that last year we did a whole session about explaining why clinical trials are important, what clinical trials are, and this year we wanted to focus a little bit about a specific aspect of clinical trial. So bear with me. So why do we need clinical trials? Clinical trials are how we test if a new drug is safe and efficacious to use. Any drug you've ever has been through a clinical trial, and they are especially important for rare diseases, right? Because patients often have very few or no treatment at all. So clinical trial, when we say clinical trials, it seems to be, okay, it's a very quick experiment. We're going to do one today, and in a month, we're going to have results. But it actually takes about 12 years from the moment we have a drug that we start testing in a laboratory to the approval of that drug into the market and for patients to start being able to use it. There are only 14% of drugs that go through this process that get approved. So the majority of the drugs that go through trials, they never get approved for different reasons. And this costs a lot of money, anywhere from millions to billions of dollars. And then, oh, we don't see. And this is all even worse for rare diseases because only 5% of all rare diseases do have a drug that is approved through this process. So it's very important to get clinical trials right. We can't just say we're going to start one and we'll see if it works or not. We'll do another one because it will take a decade or more to get one right. So what makes rare disease trials special? Well, rare diseases affect a smaller number of patients. Patients are often widely dispersed around the world, so bringing them all together to do a robust trial can be very difficult. Patients are also all not living close by academic center where these trials often happen, so it's hard for them to travel, especially when they have mitochondrial disease. They are tired, they have all sorts of different health problems. The science is less mature in terms of rare diseases. We don't really know a lot about the rare diseases, how they work, why they do what they do, and how we can fix them really well and what organ to really focus on. And so it makes designing clinical trials very challenging for rare diseases. And the entity that oversees all of these clinical trial activity is the Food and Drug Administration. So they supervise everything and they are very, very strict on what needs to happen in clinical trials and what data we should be collecting and how we analyze the data and how we interpret that data. So all of the stuff we do, we could do it really well and then we go to the FDA and the FDA might have a problem with it. So why do we need to strategically think about clinical trials in rare diseases? We need to be very smart because we don't have a lot of patients and we don't want to overburden our patients. So the trial design is like planning a smart experiment, right? For rare diseases, we cannot use clinical trial designs that might work for heart disease or diabetes where we have thousands of patients. And trial must be thus smaller and they must be done faster because our patients with rare diseases are in dire need for treatments and they need to be a lot more flexible because our patients with rare disease cannot do everything a typical patient with a more common disease might be able to do. And so every clinical trial for rare disease is kind of like crafting a very sophisticated recipe. And we cannot use the same recipe for every rare disease because every rare disease is very different. So every rare disease will need their own specific recipe. Okay, so what are inclusion and exclusion criteria? And this is what I wanted to focus on a little bit today. So for every trial, we cannot let anybody enroll in the trial because we have to follow a very strict set of rules that the FDA wants us to follow. So these who we let in the trial and who we decline to put in a trial are called exclusion and inclusion criteria. So inclusion means a set of rules that allows us to pick a subject that is fit to be in the trial because they have certain characteristics that we are looking for, or they have a specific gene that is causing their disease, or they have a specific clinical syndrome that we are looking for. Exclusion criteria are meant to make sure that we are not enrolling patients where the trial might not be a safe environment for them. So if we think that they have something clinically that might put them at risk while being in the trial, we need to exclude them from being in that trial. Okay, so why do these criteria matter? Because they are really not meant to punish anybody or to exclude anybody. They are really there to make sure that we collect clear data and good results while making sure everyone we put in a trial is very, very safe. So we are really protecting the safety of the patient. We are ensuring that the drug that we are testing is being tested in the right group. And we want to be very scientifically sound so that we don't leave any room for the FDA to criticize or find any gaps or issues in the data that we are collecting. So a real world analogy is you won't be testing snow tires in a desert, right? You really need to use the proper tire for the proper environment. So it's very similar for clinical trials.
So the challenge is, though, we don't like exclusion-inclusion criteria either. But because we know that when we make our inclusion and exclusion criteria very strict, we are really restricting the pool of the patient that we can enroll in the trial. That makes the trial go much longer, and that complicates things. But we really need to be very balanced, because the clearer we are in terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria, the better the data we will be collecting, the safer the data that we will be collecting. And overall, even if it takes us longer to enroll the trial, we might not have to do another trial afterwards if we did it wrong the first time. So what success looks like for rare diseases: a drug that works, that is safe for the people who need it the most, fewer delays by selecting the best patients through these inclusion and exclusion criteria so that we can achieve better outcomes, better results, clearer results, and hope for families who've been waiting for too long. Because if we're not enrolling well, then we might delay things from happening. So final thoughts: strategic design for a rare disease clinical trial is very important. It allows us to have better science and more patient impact. Inclusion and exclusion criteria is not there to punish anyone or to prevent anyone from it being in a clinical trial. They are really meant to just allow us to gather more sound scientific data and to better understand if the drug really works and on what patient population it works best. And every patient in the rare disease trial is really a hero, because we ask a lot of you and we really appreciate your commitment. I don't know if you've been in clinical trials, but we ask you to do a lot of things: surveys, tests at home, blood tests, come to the hospital to get probed, and to be asked to do a lot of things. So thank you so much for participating in our clinical trials, and I hope we will have some good news next year at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karaa. That really sets the landscape for the discussion. Much like the last panel, this is very much meant to be interactive. So if at any time you have a question, please just put your arm up for the panel, put your hand up, and one of our runners in the back will track you down with a microphone. So just to kind of keep the conversation going off of Dr. Kara's comments, perhaps, Megan, it might be nice for you to share your lived experience of participating in a clinical trial, and really what a lot of those guidelines and thoughts from Dr. Karaa, like as a patient, how do you receive that? How does it make you feel? And importantly, what does it mean to the folks out there that perhaps haven't yet participated in a clinical trial?
Sure. So, hello, everybody. It was a lot longer than probably anybody who hasn't been in a clinical trial before. So, for example, I was living in Orlando, Florida at the time, and I have my mitochondrial doctor in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had to fill out first a bunch of paperwork, and then we would first go to my mito doctor every, say, once a week. And then they'd do blood work. I would stay there for 9 hours and then fly back to Orlando. And then it then started going every 2 weeks. And we would stay there for maybe 3 hours, and then we'd go back to Orlando. It then began months, and then it was a lot, but it needed to be done. My family and I kept saying for the greater good. Because if we don't do it, who else is? So that is, I mean, the short of the long, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing those thoughts. And, you know, I often say, well, participating in a clinical trial is a very selfless act, right? That participation, while you hope it is a part of bringing a therapy to market that can help yourself, it's really for the greater good, as you said, for others in the community and future generations. So, thank you for doing that, Megan. Chad, why don't we bring the industry perspective in, right? So the clinical investigator kind of laid out thoughts on this, the patient kind of talked about it, but ultimately it is the sponsor who's responsible for designing the trials. What are some common pitfalls, in your opinion, where you have this ideal versus what actually ends up being designed? What are the pitfalls in between there?
Yeah, I think Mel touched on a lot of this. I think we're kind of in a second wave of clinical trials. Obviously, as many of us know, there's been some challenges along the way, and I think some very large late-phase studies that unfortunately haven't read out as we would hope them to read out. And I think that that's awful for the patient community to experience, but at the same time for folks like us, Jacinto, that's designing a trial and thinking about this kind of in the next wave of clinical studies, there's a lot of lessons learned that was not all done for no reason. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to improve upon what has happened. I think two of the main things that we have learned from those other studies and other programs is we say no two patients are exactly the same, right? And some of those trials, I think, really trying to cast the net wider and broader to help with enrollment, to help with how many patients you can treat eventually, ended up being challenging on the back end in terms of really detecting a strong signal. And I think it's balancing clinical feasibility with really a rigorous trial, making sure that you're finding that right balance. I think the other issue is outcome measures. I think we've talked a lot about this at the meeting and previous meetings. You know, we've tried certain measures that just have not performed well. And I think the agency and other regulators have their favorites. Industry has our favorites. We all need to figure out a path forward in terms of outcome measures that really measure what's important to the patient. And I think that's something that we've tried to do with our program. But I think, again, trying to react to previous studies and those pioneers and all those folks that came before us and really improve upon those things, make sure we have the right study design. We spent almost 2 years, I think, designing our PRISM trial, and a lot of that process was based on what had been done previously. So I'm hopeful. I think we're on a kind of a new trajectory in terms of clinical trial design.
So the takeaway might be go slow to then go fast, right, and be successful. And that's not always easy, right, as you're dealing with who you report to and shareholders and folks like that. But ultimately, it may give us the best chance of having success in the space. Yeah. You know, Dr. Karaa, I would like to come back, on your slide, you may have seen me scribbling up here, you had, we need smaller, faster, and more flexible trials. But we have clinician perspective, industry perspective, patient. There's sort of a missing perspective here. That's the FDA, who ultimately, regulates, therapeutics. Do you think they share that perspective?
Good question.
Thank you.
We just had a big FDA workshop a few weeks ago where the whole purpose of putting together that workshop was really to try to answer that question. We had our first FDA workshop in 2019 when we were just starting to develop these clinical trials. Back then, the FDA was asking us to design trials like we would design them for other non-rare diseases, where they wanted us to enroll hundreds of patients. They wanted us to test the patient for 12 months, and we negotiated a little bit, but we weren't able to really get all the concessions from the FDA. And what we've learned since 2019 is that a lot of the trials that have gone that route and did big trials where we enrolled multiple patients that were very different did not prove to be successful. And so we didn't want to continue to do the same thing. And we asked the FDA if we can meet with them again to try to explain and educate them. Like, we are not talking about a common disease. And even within the rare disease group, mitochondrial disorders are very, very different from all the other rare diseases. So it really needed to have its own special consideration. And I think for the most, all of them understood that. But changing mind takes time. And although they have been much more flexible in the latest trials that we are conducting now, where we're not enrolling hundreds of patients, we're enrolling 40 patients, and we're enrolling 60 patients, and we're not treating them for years, for 12 months, we're treating them for 3-6 months. So that's an improvement, right? The FDA has listened, but there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of education to be had with the FDA. So we're hoping to continue the dialogue with the FDA and continue to educate them and continue to teach them and learn with them from the trials that we are conducting. And hopefully we will get it right at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, we have to maintain a dialogue with the agency. It can be really frustrating, beyond frustrating, sometimes maddening, the pace or some of the decisions that are made that don't seem to be in the best interest of the patients. But ultimately, we have to find a way to work with the FDA that's in place. And a lot of work is going into it. It's a work in progress, but I think we can rather comfortably say there's a much greater awareness of mitochondrial disease and understanding of the complexity of mitochondrial disease, and a demonstrated willingness to consider flexibility in trial design and therapeutic development in general for mitochondrial disease. So these are all very much positives. Megan, I'm going to come back to you. As you reflect on the clinical trial that you participated in, maybe share what made you feel most comfortable or hesitant about joining that trial as a patient.
I would say joining it, feeling most comfortable was my support system, because I knew that no matter what happened, I always had my family, I always had my friends, so I had a good support system. Now, as for hesitancy, I knew that there would be this would go on for a long time. And this would take away from school, this would take away, I had no idea what this would do to my body. So, it kind of took a leap of faith. Because, I have MRF, so I don't want to get worse.
Of course.
But I could get better.
Yep.
So it was just kind of who knows?
Yeah, it's a balancing of it. Kind of two takeaways that what I heard inside of there. One, the importance of support, right? And perhaps for anyone considering joining a clinical trial, you may feel like you're on your own. Hopefully you have family that can be supportive of you during that period. If not, just know the UMDF is here to support however we can. Find peers that we can connect you with to help during that period. But support is really important, right? And the second is remembering that this is research. That might be the hardest aspect to keep front of mind. Many smart people do their best to design a hypothesis and test the drugs before it ever comes to being put into humans. But it's still research, and you don't know what the outcomes are. There may be side effects. But ultimately, it's an individual decision around that, again, what is the greater good, the benefit that can come out of it. And really thank you for making that decision, Megan, and hope many others will join you there. So Chad, we just heard the sort of patient voice perspective, right, on joining clinical trials, what's important to them. How can industry, those working in the mitochondrial disease space, maybe better incorporate the patient voice into clinical trial design?
Yeah, I mean, I think the patients themselves are probably the most valuable resource to help industry figure out what needs to be done. I spoke a little bit about outcome measures, and again, there's a lack of validated outcome measures that's appropriate for the broad and heterogeneous range of patients. And so, when we were thinking about designing this trial, we wanted to do a qualitative interview study to focus on individuals with knee loss, which is, again, the focus of our trial, and understand their disease experience. And so, you look at these research papers of all the different organ systems and manifestations that clinicians see and want to treat when they follow their knee loss patients. And when you distill that down to what a patient experiences on a day-to-day basis, it really helps us think through that and prioritize those things in our clinical study. So that was extremely influential in terms of the decisions we made for outcome measure selection, how we designed our endpoint model, how our analysis is set up. And I think without that data, we might still be kind of circling and swirling without really a path forward. So I would encourage other sponsors, especially in rare diseases where there's really not much precedent, to listen to the patient as much as they can.
Great point, Chad. I mean, really, every trial is an opportunity for us to learn, right? Learn beyond the trial about what's important to the patients or what the lived experience is really like. So really encourage all the sponsors in this space and will going forward to collect that qualitative data, right, that surrounds all the quantitative data that's typically a part of a clinical trial. So thanks for bringing that up. I see we have a question in the audience. Yes?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Janelle Dorner. I am a mitochondrial disease patient, and I'm also a patient advocate with a science background, so it's a little quick about me. But my question to you is, our focus with new drugs a lot of the time is this long time to get them approved and to figure out how they work. And so we have this extended time period where we're waiting for things to happen. And we do have a lot of drugs already FDA approved, and some of them in research are showing that there is mitochondrial effects that could be beneficial to us. And I'm wondering, Dr. Yeske, your thoughts on possible repurposing of existing FDA-approved drugs and how that could be fit into clinical trials for patients, because it would be a lot more cost-effective for patients, even though it might not have a lot of money put into it from other means. So that's my question.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to everyone as well, the panelists and you for this. I think it's really important, and I'm excited about the future. So.
All right, thanks. And I know this is your first time coming to UMDF conference. Thank you for doing that. Briefly, we're really talking about novel therapeutics or new things in development, but you're absolutely correct that there are many drugs that have already been put into humans. The safety profile's well understood. Maybe it was another indication, not mitochondrial disease. So this is called drug repurposing. And I don't have a lot of time to go into detail today, but except to say, like when we think about therapeutic development for mitochondrial disease, it has to be a multi-layered approach, right? And so the opportunity to more quickly bring therapeutics to patients based on drug repurposing is a nice sort of baseline, right? That maybe slows progression, stabilizes, likely not disease modifying, but it still could be important for the quality of life of the patients. And then you layer on some of what we've heard, whether it's Tacento or other sponsors in the space trying to bring novel therapeutics, typically disease modifying, right? Or at least substantively changing the quality of life, right, of the patients. And then there's the really exciting sort of high risk, high rewards out there in the upper right-hand corner, precision medicine, right, around gene therapies and base editing and cell therapies. And all of those things are being researched in mitochondrial disease. So again, the message for the patient community is it's an exciting time. It's still early with regards to some of those longer term things, but none of us know exactly how quickly they'll proceed. So drug repurposing absolutely needs to be a part of our overall strategy for helping mitochondrial disease patients. I see we have a couple minutes left, maybe one more question, and then we'll do some wrap-up comments. Please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marissa. I'm a patient with mitochondrial disease. It's my first conference as well, so thank you for having me. My question is for the novel agents. I know that you were talking about wanting to shorten the time of the trial to get them to market more quickly. Is there a sweet spot, in your opinion, between kind of getting them to trial quickly, but also making sure that they are still safe to be taken? Like I know you said, oh, maybe try and only give them for 3 months versus a year. At what point is it like the balance between safety and still getting them to people on time?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we're going to let Dr. Karaa respond to that one.
That's a great question, and I don't think we have a one-size-fits-all answer because it really depends on what the drug does and what we are treating with it. And so there are drugs where we know that there's going to be a significant effect, and that effect is going to be seen pretty quickly because the drug is quickly acting, and what we are trying to impact can have a quick turnaround. Like, for example, fixing the heart failure that happens pretty quickly versus having a drug that will take time to get into muscles that have been malfunctioning for years and years. We can't get those muscles to perform normally within just a 3-month period. It might take those muscles 6 months or 9 months. And so really it depends on the drug and on what we are targeting. But we try as hard as we can to push back on the FDA when they are asking for, because they often ask, we want you to do a 12-month trial. And we often push back and say 12 months is too long. Let's meet in the middle somewhere.
Thanks, Dr. Karaa. I see we're at time. I'm going to check my notes. It looks like I'm moderating the next session, so I'm going to steal a little time from myself because I do want to make sure we give the panelists a chance for some quick concluding comments. As Kristen said in the first panel, this is really the beginning of any discussion like this. You can't possibly cover it all in 30 minutes, right? So we're trying to catalyze, start the conversation. I'd love to come out of this with things that we think might be actionable. What can we do in the near term, right, to advance this and keep the conversation going? So that's what I'm going to throw to to the panelists. And Megan, again, because the patient perspective is so important, what might be one actionable thing, near term, you think we could do to improve clinical trial design in mitochondrial disease?
I guess something to improve would be communication between the PAs that I was working with and the patients. I would recommend any patient look up clinical trials, please.
Yeah. Great words, and absolutely, like in any relationship, communication is key. And so being in a clinical trial is very much a relationship, right, between the patient and the clinical investigator and their team. And so maybe Dr. Karaa, we can kind of bounce to you, and we'll come back to you, Chad. Then what are your thoughts then from the clinical view? How do we improve clinical trial readiness? Something actionable.
Something actionable for me would be to have all of you register into MitoShare.
Hold on, I got to pay her for that.
They didn't pay me to say that. I'm going to tell you why. It's because the hardest thing for a clinical trial is to be ready and not have patients. And the hardest part is to try to come up with those tools that we need to test if a drug works and not have patients give us feedback about them. And so where are we going to find patients? We do have our own patients, but as I said, exclusion inclusion criteria. Not all our patients are going to fit into what we're trying to look at. And so we need to find you somewhere. And the best place to find you is if we know where you are. And MitoShare is the place where we can find you easily. So we can send you communication to tell you about these studies, to solicit your help and support. And when a trial is ready, this is how we can communicate to you that this is a trial and it's ready and we want you to come in and enroll in these trials. So to me, that's the most important piece.
I really can't add anything to that from your lips to the patient's ears. I would just say, if you're already in MitoShare, be an advocate, right? Be an ambassador for it. Tell others that you know aren't part of the registry why they should, and encourage them to do it, because there's nothing replaces that sort of peer-to-peer connection. The registry is absolutely the most important thing we can do to be ready for clinical trials. All right, Chad, you get final word here from the industry perspective. Something actionable. That's tough after those two.
So that was mine. I thought this through, and so Mel stole it, but so I have to come up with something new. Again, we need to know where the patients are. They need to be aware of clinical research. They need to be hopefully comfortable and interested in it, that we need patients to complete these trials. I think the other thing that, we're knee deep in enrolling. We have an active study and things do take time. And I think any way to streamline, even site startup is something that we're still, wrestling with, how long it takes from the point of kind of that first disclosure agreement to the point where they can screen patients. And we're starting to get our heads wrapped around that data, but just ways to streamline and decrease the amount of time from kind of that first milestone to hopefully the point that you actually have data. And, that's it's out of our control, unfortunately, as a sponsor. And a lot of these academic institutions, they have processes in place, which we understand. But I think at a higher level, if there's some way to mobilize and create more flexibility and more urgency, I think that would hopefully get drugs to the market more quickly.
Well done. All right, so just to summarize, obviously, we have to look for efficiencies. So streamlining the process of starting trials, really important, and that's something we are working on and thinking about how UMDF can play a role inside of that. Amel very kindly mentioned the registry and the importance of knowing where the patients are, and then we can have well-characterized patients, your genetics, your symptoms, all in one place so that we're ready to help advance research in the space. And Megan's thoughts on communication, right? If you're part of a clinical care team, if you're a patient, really focus on asking the questions you need to ask, but please be patient with the patients, because likely this may be the first clinical trial they're participating in. So all very important captures. So please join me in thanking the panelists who really provide some good time. Okay, maybe in the interest of trying to keep us on time here after the slacker in the last session, we don't need to introduce Dr. Karaa again. We know who she is, but now next to her, we have another clinician from the mito community. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Zuela Zolkipli Cunningham. I am a mitochondrial physician at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Good to see you all.
And we can call you Dr. Z, right?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, and then we have two representatives from a partner organization with UMDF called Combined Brain, and so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha. I'm with Combined Brain. This year is Terry Jo. She's our CEO. I am the biorepository manager for Combined Brain. It's good to meet you all.
It's great to be here. We've been having a great day and meeting a lot of you. So I'm Terry Jo Bichelle. I'm CEO, like she said, of Combined Brain.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So we'd like to just briefly talk about some of the things that are taking place. We are on the 4th floor right now, right? So yes, just down the hall to the left. And at the other end of the hall is the biorepository action. So why don't we start with Combined Brain and maybe just explain a little bit. I can give a little bit of background, right? When we think about from a UMDF kind of stewardship point of view for mitochondrial disease, we thought it was really important that we try to facilitate building a very robust biorepository for mitochondrial disease. And Terry Jo or Sasha, maybe you can kind of speak to why that's important in the context of a rare disease.
Yeah, so building a biorepository is really important so that we can get samples from patients who have the disorder. If we have samples, then when research opportunities come up, they can reach out to the biorepository and request certain samples, maybe even specific variants or specific mutations from patients with a disorder that's mitochondrial related. So it's just important to help further research. It's one of the first steps for affected patients to give us samples, and then we can analyze them and figure out if there are any biomarkers that we could target for future drugs or treatment options. So yeah, that's one of the first steps.
Anything you want to add, Terry Jo, to that?
Well, one of the best things about having a biorepository is that it de-risks drug development. So when you have a new company or a new investigator that wants to learn about mitochondrial disorders, instead of having to start from scratch, recruit patients, take blood samples, all of those complicated things, it's already sitting there ready to go. And so it makes it much faster and easier for new companies to join the field, for older companies to do something new and different, and for investigators to be able to have everything they need to just go and do the research.
Yeah, that's a really important one, right? So I've been involved in this role for almost 13 years. And, I can't tell you the number of times where there would be outreach to say, oh, we're thinking about coming into mitochondrial disease. Do you have access to any cells with this specific mutation? No, not directly, right? But we try to facilitate a contact, maybe to an investigator, a hospital where we think those cells might be. But that's not a terribly efficient way. Right? It adds time to the process. The investigator, clinician may decide not to share the sample. So what we're building here is under UMDF stewardship. We will always consider all requests, whether they're from academia or industry, as long as they're fit for purpose. They're going to advance the understanding of mitochondrial disease. We're going to make that transfer happen as quickly as possible. And it's these little things like this can really make a difference. To be successful with that, though, and Sasha briefly touched upon this, mitochondrial disease is it's a collection of diseases, hundreds of different diseases, right? So we need probably thousands of samples ultimately, right, to be able to service the needs of researchers with various ideas that may work on one type but not another type. So it's yet another example where we ask you to consider participating in this form of clinical research, donating literally a piece of yourself. And so we are collecting, maybe briefly just summarized today at the biorepository.
Yeah, today we're actually in the conference room over there, Mill 6. We're collecting blood and urine from everybody in the shop collection area as well, blood and urine. That's just for today. In the future, we could ask you guys for more samples, different sample types based on what seems to be popular in the research area for your disorder, but that's what we're collecting today, blood and urine.
Yeah, and so to make sure that we're doing this in a rigorous way, that we really are collecting the best samples, right, that we really need, we actually designed a workflow that begins with the registry. And so, Dr. K, since you did such a great job of talking about the registry, maybe you could briefly kind of go over how do patients that are interested come through the registry to be a part of the biorepository?
Sure. I just wanted to clarify that for these samples, we are not testing anything. We're just collecting them and storing them.
Important.
And we will use them in the future as opportunities arise to study a specific gene or a specific disease. So that's very important for you to know. We're not using them right now, but we have them handy if we need them in the future. I also wanted to stress that we are looking, remember the inclusion-exclusion criteria? And so we need, even for these studies, we have inclusion-exclusion criteria, right? So our first inclusion criteria is we need to know exactly what genetic makeup you have that is causing your specific mitochondrial disease. So if you do have a genetic condition, you would be eligible to donate your samples, right? We will be collecting samples from patients who don't have a genetic confirmation in the future, but for today and this week, it's just for genetically confirmed patients, okay? So bear with us as we enhance the program and broaden the program so we can enroll everyone. So how can you be part of this? On your left, when you get out of here, all the way in that big window where you see the big arch, there is a desk that says Mitoshare. That is your first stop. You go there, you tell them, I want to be part of Mitoshare. If you are not already part of Mitoshare, you get an account, and within that account, you answer some questions and you upload your genetic testing. If you don't have it with you right now, if you can have someone take a picture of it from home, or if you can call your doctor and have them fax it over or send them through the patient gateway, that would be great, because we do need to verify the genetic. It's very important for us because when we're doing research, we really need to know what kind of gene is dysfunctional so we can do the proper testing on those samples. So once we review the genetic testing and you are approved, we release your name, and you then have to consent to get your sample taken through the combined brain consent form. So that's a separate consent form, but when you're enrolling in Mitoshare, it will all be in Mitoshare, it's all electronic. So once we confirm that you have a genetic diagnosis, you can consent to that, and then that's it. That's all you need. You go to the room and you give them your best arm, and then you get your blood drawn, and then you go to the restroom and you give us a pee sample. That's it.
Absolutely.
I don't mind just adding to that, Phil. Sure. The observation I've made in other disorders where treatment is available now, where we hope to be, the samples that we collect now are very, very opportune. It needs to be before treatment is on board, because otherwise we don't have the opportunity to study and understand more about mito disease or response to treatment without having samples collected prior to available treatment. So now is a good time to be starting this effort. I work in other disorders where most patients are already on treatment, and we don't have any baseline samples pre-treatment to compare it to, and therefore we're not able to study.
It's a good point, Dr. Z. We call it clinical trial readiness, but it's really therapeutic readiness, right? So it's how do we prepare ourselves for having all the therapies, right, that we want and need to treat mitochondrial disease patients. A really important part of that is a biorepository. Mitoshare also gives us a chance to engage you then in kind of better understanding your lived experience as a patient. And then if there's additional research studies down the road, we already know you, right, in a sense, by what you've contributed into Mitoshare, and now we can bring relevant studies to you for you to consider other ways that you can participate. And eventually, clinical trials themselves. We really see that as part of the roadmap down the road. But right now, we're trying to take care of the most important steps to prepare us for those clinical trials, and biosamples are a big part of it. So thank you for joining us and being a part of it here. All right, Dr. Z, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has been a partner with UMDF on the Clinical Research Pavilion from day one, 3 years ago. This is our third year. Thank you for that partnership. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your study, what's taking place inside the CHOP space, inside the Clinical Research Pavilion, and what kinds of opportunities may exist for the patients there.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, 3 years ago, I think 2 months before the pavilion, the conference, Phil Yeske said, do you want to do this?
Just in time.
And we rushed to make it happen. And this is why it's so important. We conduct studies at CHOP in my research program to essentially help us learn how to increase the rigor, so that's the standard and the quality of the clinical trial, that we understand needs optimization compared to other disorders. So we assess patients in our clinic on a routine basis. By that I mean we assess how well you walk, how well your balance is, your stability is when you're walking. your muscle strength, your muscle fatigue, your dexterity, your exercise tolerance. So we're doing that on a routine basis in our clinic space. And what we wanted to do was to expand those clinic patients and clinic assessments beyond CHOP to the conference where all of you convene. Because the strength is always in the number of the patients that are involved in the clinical study. And we're doing this to improve our chances of helping the drug approval process, because we do not currently have evidence that the FDA seek in terms of certain measures used in clinical trials and how quickly they change over time in our patients. That's called the natural history, meaning how does it change over time, year by year, without prior treatment. And many other disorders are successful in achieving drug approval because they have this evidence to show, and we just haven't had that in mitochondrial disease. So next door, it is literally next door, you will see a whole room full of staff. The first year we came here, I brought 5 staff. Today, this year, we have 14 staff. We have expanded in our assessments and capability because we understand that the types of data we're obtaining are essentially very, very helpful. There is 3 physical therapists who will measure your strength using a handheld digital meter. Also conduct things like the 6-minute walk test and how quickly you stand up and sit down in a 30-second sit-to-stand measure. There's about 9 components of this assessment that make up what we call the mitochondrial myopathy composite assessment tool, which we have proposed to be a new clinical trial measure for mitochondrial myopathy because it measures all of your symptoms and equally weights it, as opposed to measuring only 1 or 2 of your symptoms. And this is key to understanding, in truth, represent your overall symptoms. And what we have at CHOP is the understanding of how patients change. Each patient changes over time, year by year, up to 5 years in this natural history study that I've been conducting, funded by the UMDF. And what we have now is understanding, and this is the good news, it's very reassuring. The change that occurs across the mitochondrial myopathy patients is small per year. The change is so small that you're probably not necessarily aware of it for 2 to 3 years. So this is reassuring for us, but we need to get this assessment to a broader population, and that's what we're trying to do here, and this is what Phil Yeske's been promoting. So we have these assessments next door. It takes up to 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Please do participate if you're able. You're also able to understand from the physical therapist, if you like, by asking them, how did I do? It's really essential that you contribute your data because there's this term called unbiased data. It's really important that we collect data on as many patients as we are able to ensure that it is not biased, for example, to the CHOP clinic population only. Do you understand? So that's really, really important, and this is what Dr. Yeske has been trying to do, ensure that these assessments reach more patients beyond our institution only. So that's one of the things we're doing, but the more, I think, innovative thought that Phil had was to incorporate, by chance, he met these vendors who have digital wearables who are now collaborating with us, and they've been collaborating with us for 3 years. It's remarkable. We have a mat that digitally assesses your stability, your balance, and your speed beyond what I'm able to do with my naked eye with the physical therapist. We have sensors that we place on your waist and your legs to see how balanced you are. And it turns out, because really, mitophysicians don't necessarily capture so well balance in population. In fact, we've been asked before, why do you capture this? In our data, we're showing tremendous, significant problems with balance in our patients. And we're now able to capture that over time. More importantly, we're capturing it digitally, so it's really very precise. And so we have that, and then we have a third device, which is really very innovative. It's through collaboration with the Stevens Institute, where it's an insole that goes into your shoe, meaning it's something you can do at home, and it captures your gait assessment without having to come here on a gait mat, without having to go into a hospital to use a gait mat. It's something that we hope to be able to give to you for you to, for example, in a clinical trial, utilize at home, and therefore your balance and your fatigue can be assessed while you're at home, and that data is transmitted to us. So there are 3 of those digital assessments that we are conducting next door. There is one other study that we're really very proud of, because this is brand new this year, and now we're really extending it to clinical research at the UMDF. We have at CHOP a large program that is funded by the Department of Defense to develop new ways to measure your mitochondrial function. We're developing breath testing, we're developing pupillometry testing, we have a nanosensor. We haven't brought those to the conference yet, maybe next year. But this year, I brought one of the 4, which is a passive exercise device. It moves your ankles and it exercises you, but it has a special ingredient, which is a tap, tap, tap motion at a specific frequency that has been demonstrated across 20 years of research to improve diabetes in diabetic patients, blood pressure in hypertensive patients, generally just improves wellness, which equates to mitochondrial health. So when I encountered this, and the co-inventor who's here, Dr. Tony Adams, who's helping us at this conference kindly, I thought, why aren't we testing it in mitochondrial patients? So in this corner, in the next room, we have these devices that you will sit down and exercise on for 45 minutes, and then you get a series of assessments. When you are exercising, when you are walking and your heels are pounding on the ground, that releases nitric oxide in the blood vessels in your feet. The blood vessels dilate, and there's a whole cascade of events that essentially is promoting health. And we're measuring that by way of blood samples that Combined Health are drawing for us to measure nitric oxide metabolites in blood. We're conducting an ultrasound of the leg to measure vasodilatation in response to the exercise. And we're conducting, this is incredibly innovative, there's a 400-pound machine that we brought over from Philadelphia, and 2 engineers are utilizing optical light to measure muscle oxygen consumption before and after exercise. All of this helps us understand what the physiology occurs after passive exercise, which is very more achievable compared to active exercise, which is harder for most of you. And if this study is successful, it means that we have a new way of delivering the benefits of exercise to our patients without having to be involved in active exercise that is too difficult.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, maybe keeping in the spirit of the last panel, inclusion, exclusion criteria, because we know that's important for clinical research. Who can and who can't participate?
Excellent. So any ages above 10, you do not have to have genetic confirmation, because we are interested in anybody with mitochondrial dysfunction. We are very interested in healthy volunteers. Please, anybody with a spare 90 minutes during this conference, we would really be very, very grateful. Your participation is key to our success of these studies, and the studies are there to help improve our trials.
All right, thank you very much for that, Dr. Z. So really a great opportunity, regardless of your diagnostic state, just have to be over 10 years of age, right? Okay, Dr. K, let's come back to MitoShare, because I know a shared goal for you and I as co-PIs on that is to really expand the kinds of clinical research we can do inside the patient registry. So there's an exciting opportunity taking place in the clinical research pavilion.
Yeah, so we have 2 exciting studies to tell you about. One that we are doing just here this week, and it'll be done. And the other one will start after this meeting and will go on for at least 2 years. And so the first one is called the MitoArch study, and it's supported by Ticento. Chad was representing Ticento earlier here. So what we're trying to do is really to better understand the cognition of patients who live with mitochondrial disease. So the way the brain functions, how the memory functions, how you remember things, how fast your brain works. And it's a very easy 20-minute study. You just have to look at an iPad and click on symbols and buttons and follow the instructions, and it lasts about 15-20 minutes, and that's it. After you do that test, we ask you to fill out a questionnaire to tell us about how tired you are and what your fatigue level is, because we are cognizant that fatigue plays really a major role in how tired your brain might also get. And so if you, again, the inclusion-exclusion criteria do have a genetic confirmation of your mitochondrial disease, if you are an adult who is able to visually see the iPad screen and the boxes on the iPad screen, then you can participate in the study. If you are in MitoShare, just go to the desk and let them know you're interested in MitoArch. And if you're not in MitoShare, just enroll in MitoShare and give us your genetic testing. We'll review it and we'll let you know if you can be part of the study. So that study is only happening today and tomorrow and on Saturday if you are around. But after that, it's going to be done. The next study is called the Merlin study, which is a study that we are doing from home. We are trying to identify patients, again, with genetically confirmed mitochondrial disease who have fatigue and experience exercise intolerance. So what we are going to ask you to do is to answer questionnaires and do some exercise testing from home. We will obviously train you and explain everything to you, but if you're interested in the study, you also will have to enroll in MitoShare. So go to MitoShare desk and ask them to be enrolled and let them know you are interested in the Merlin study. As I said, it's not active yet, but will be right after the meeting. And so we will reach out to you and let you know that it's open and activated.
Yeah, so it's really about recruiting, right, for that study. So again, incredibly exciting, right, that we are now have these a part of the conference. And when you come here, you come to learn, to network, community, but you'll also have the opportunity to participate in clinical research. And I'll give ourselves some credit. I'm not sure we really thought about it, right? But these three panels really do tie together, right? So the clinical research pavilion where we can get biosamples, we can enroll you in studies to help us better understand the patients. That'll help the last panel where we talked about designing better clinical trials, because we're going to have more data and better understand what's important to you and how you respond to these things. And ultimately, with better clinical trials, the very first session, approved therapies. So it really all locks together, but the common thread is patient engagement in all of them. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I apologize that we don't have time for questions, but I think we'll all be around. If you have any, please approach any one of us. Again, Combined Brain Biorepository all the way at that end, and the Clinical Research Pavilion just here to our left. So at the very least, go and learn about it, and you can make a decision for yourself. Okay, we're heading to break. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate that, and look forward to getting to know you more, and hope that you'll decide to participate in clinical research. Thank you.
Thank you.